Good afternoon and welcome. We thank you for joining our fireside chat today, The Entrepreneur's Conundrum, Protecting IP While Navigating the Call for Transparency in Clinical Algorithms. My name is Tom Busby. I'm a proud board member here at Health Tech Build and delighted to have two of my panelists join me today. On behalf of Health Tech Build and our sponsors, once again, we thank you for your time. Artificial intelligence algorithms represent valuable intellectual property to companies developing them, and sharing code may put competitive advantage at risk, discourage AI R&D, and introduce challenges in ensuring algorithm quality and consistency. At the same time, robust debate is happening within research and clinical communities which strongly advocate for more open access and sharing to ensure accountability, safety, and fairness in healthcare. Transparency in code, data, and algorithms helps researchers, clinicians, and regulators understand how AI systems make decisions, which is seen as crucial for identifying and addressing errors, biases, and safety concerns in healthcare. How can the proprietary interests of a company developing clinical algorithms be balanced with the need for transparency and collaboration in healthcare AI? Further, how can companies best navigate the relevant legal complexities of their AI intellectual property? This fireside chat is going to explore all of these complex questions. Joining me today, we have two fantastic panelists, serial entrepreneur, former chemist, and longtime technology strategist and company builder, Ajay Gopal, and AJ Tibbetts, a shareholder and IP attorney at Greenberg Traurig, Health Tech Build board member, and himself a computer science engineer who spent time as a programmer in the tech space before transitioning to law. Welcome you both today. Thank you for taking time out.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having me, Tom.
Thanks, AJ, and thank you, Ajay. Appreciate it. Maybe, Ajay, we can start with you. If you could talk a little bit about what brought you to healthcare and led you to AI in healthcare, and then how that touches kind of your current venture now with RX Studio.
Sure, happy to do that. Thank you once again for you and for Health Tech Build for creating this forum. I think it's a very important one. I view myself in the context of this conversation as in my third act. I got a PhD at Chicago. I was a postdoc at UCLA, and that was really focused on building statistical models to explain disease, causal factors, as well as in trying to develop antiviral strategies using informatics. From there, I went into kind of the dark side. I became a quant for financial services, building risk models, think credit decisioning, lending, money laundering models, etc. And after that, I wanted to go back towards health and wellness in my third act, and so I joined a food company building a precision nutrition application, followed by starting my own startup, which is RX Studio for the past year, which focuses on precision dosing and clinical support to get better outcomes from medication. So that's been my journey. I'm happy to talk about all elements of it, and I think there's statistics weaving through my entire career. So over to you, AJ.
Yeah. Great. Yeah, thanks, Tom. And we're happy to join this conversation. I've been working in healthcare for over 10 years now, or with healthcare companies from a legal perspective for over 10 years now, leaning on my background as a former software engineer, now software attorney, and really enjoy working with companies at this intersection of health tech and life sciences.
Fantastic. And maybe AJ, if you can start us off at the 100,000-foot level, maybe what are the different options and pathways to protect innovations and algorithms that entrepreneurs should be thinking of?
Yeah, there are a few different options that people should be thinking of when they're considering how to protect the investment they're making in their technology. A few different ways that you can protect it. They have different pros and cons. Let's start off with a straightforward one. Copyright is something that comes to mind for people often when they're talking about software and technology. That, similar to a copyright for a book, protects you with respect to the words on the page or the code on the file, and similar things like that. Maybe to some extent, some of the model itself, the arrangement of data inside an AI model, and does not protect the functionality. It's just the data on the in the model, the code on the page. and really only protects you against copying. It's a copyright. And so if somebody takes it, uses it as is, copyright protects you against that. Again, doesn't protect against someone independently creating the code, doesn't protect the functionality, things like that. Trade secret is the next option to consider. Gets thrown around a lot. I like to differentiate trade secret from just confidentiality. Sometimes I say capital T, capital S trade secret because it's something that is widely misunderstood as being sort of easy to do, to declare that you have a trade secret, but actually having a protectable trade secret requires taking real steps to demonstrate that it has the idea has business value and you are maintaining it as a secret. Multiple different categories of secrecy that you can create, steps you can create to ensure that the idea is kept confidential. And the important thing to keep in mind with trade secret is, again, does not protect against independent creation of the technology, really protects against somebody taking it, almost like a violation of an NDA. You shared the idea with them, you shared your secret with them with some obligation of confidentiality, and they misused it, they misappropriated the trade secret. And the last category, just running through these quick options, is patents. Patents do protect against functionality, or do protect functionality, and do protect against people independently creating that functionality. So even if they don't necessarily take the idea from you, the patent can protect you. And so that's why it can offer the greatest barrier to competition, and why a lot of investors might be looking for patents, or what types of functionality do you have patented, to demonstrate that you're putting up these barriers to people ripping you off when you start to get a little bit of buzz in the industry, and so the copycats start arising.
That's the technical term, right, AJ, when we start getting ripped off.
Exactly. It's what people immediately start yelling when they pick up the phone. So,
so maybe Ajay, moving from some of the frameworks you're curious on as an entrepreneur yourself, that's really living this day in and day out. Without giving us any secrets, kind of what's been your strategy as it pertains to those different frameworks?
Yeah, so it's a tough call. I mean, and I put it overall in a corporate strategy bucket, honestly. I'm right now in an early stage startup, and I've worked at the companies all the way from a few people in a 1-bedroom apartment to 200 million top line. And really, it kicks in when you've built something worth protecting. And that means you've built something and you've attached it to a business model, and you're pretty sure that business model is going to scale, or it's showing symptoms of scaling. And that's when kind of fencing IP and guarding your freedom to operate come into my mind. And really, so I view it mostly as a strategic long-term guarantee of a viability of a business. That's in a nutshell. Happy to dig in.
I would immediately double down on that. I always like to say a patent is not a trophy. It's not a gold star. It's not your award for having had a brilliant idea. It's a business asset. It's a business tool, and you should always make sure it aligns with the business strategy. And I just said patents, but really IP strategy in general. You want to make sure that whatever your value proposition is to your stakeholders, you have an IP strategy that aligns with that, and you're getting the specific type of asset class that aligns with the value you're creating.
And Ajay, you also mentioned investors having an interest here as it pertains to IP. Curious on what you mean by that. At what stage do they expect the IP to be at, and so on and so forth?
It is mixed, right? I mean, putting kind of a simplistic Silicon Valley lens on it. Typical investor horizons are 5 to 10 years. And, generating scaled outcomes without distractions in those 5 to 10 years is the interest of an investor. And so if you view things with that lens, as a startup, your only reason to operate is some kind of innovation, right? Like if you're doing something that's already being done, you don't have the scale to operate. And so you have to be building something new, bringing some new kind of efficiency or IP into the market. That's how we feel about our studio as well. So we have to either do things cheaper little incrementally better from a UX perspective, or have new science. And to the extent we are doing any of these three or all of those three, we need to make sure that we can stay competent and competitive for the next 5 to 10 year horizon. And that's where IP comes in. And I think we would invest in IP if we thought there was a little moat we can generate there. We would invest in user experience similarly if there was a moat we could generate there. So that's how I view it. And I think fundamentally, if IP can be strategic, then I expect investor support in it.
Ajay, that's really helpful. Maybe if we could pivot a little bit too. AJ, one of Health Tech Build's core audiences are first-time entrepreneurs. And one of the questions that we receive with somewhat regularity is, when should I engage with an IP attorney? What should I look for? How do I know that they're really going to be an asset to me? What would your thoughts there be maybe as well?
Yeah, a couple different questions there. Happy to answer them sort of in the sequence that you pose them. Starting with when, I'd say it's never too early to at least have a conversation and know who you're going to be working with when something comes up. There are in the IP system a few different timelines that aren't necessarily well known. One is that once you start discussing an idea outside the company, or once you start selling a product, you might have created a timeline for yourself for filing patent protection. So if you want to get patents, you have to be aware of what your activities inside the company are doing to either limit your choices or in some cases foreclose choices. In the US, once you have released an idea into the public, once you've started describing the idea, once you've released the product, you have 1 year inside the US before your own work can be used against you to reject a patent application you file for that idea. And so again, you should know before you start releasing your products, can you get patent protection for it within that year, now that you've given yourself a timeline. Outside the US, the rules are a little bit less kind to young companies. Outside the US, you have to file before you release the product. So if you intend to go outside the US, then you want to make sure that you file first and plan that into your business strategy. And for that reason, I think it's good to get in with an attorney early, at least make a plan. In my experience, the best way to limit your IP expense is to actually have a plan, because if you just start doing things ad hoc, you end up creating difficulties for yourself that are a little bit more costly down the road. And so that brings up the second question you raised, Tom, which is, how do you choose counsel? And I would say, just call me. That's the easy one. But the other one is look for somebody who knows your industry. Ajay and I have come back to this a couple of times so far in this in just the last couple of minutes, which is IP is not something you do in a vacuum. Not all patents are created equal. Not all aspects of your product should be patented. It's not necessarily, two different strategies are going to create the same value for two different companies. You want to make sure that you have a business advisor in your attorney, someone who's going to talk with you about what your timeline is, who your stakeholders are, what kind of investors you're going after, what does your product look like, what do your competitors look like, and create an IP strategy in that landscape and figure out how do we best create value for you given the budget that you have and the time that you have. And those conversations with attorneys should be happening early on and can be part of choosing an attorney, surfacing someone who can have those conversations with you.
AJ, I have to say that the theme that seems to emerge here is intellectual property and your business and corporate strategy are really tied at the hip. They're not two things that are separated, and it's important really to align. Curious for Ajay, do you see your IP strategy as more dictating your corporate strategy, or the corporate strategy is underpinned by your IP, or sort of how do you bring those two ends together?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think the short answer is it really depends on what you are as a company, right? And you mentioned a few moments ago that a good fraction of your audience might be clinicians looking to start their own companies. If they're doing a lot of clinical trials and they've landed upon a new discovery, the answer could be your an IP first company that's trying to commercialize it. On the RX Studio side, we are a technology first company that is trying to build IP. And I think the strategic answers there are very different. So if you're more like us and you're building a technology, we actually, to AJ's point earlier, we wanted to make sure at the very beginning that we even have freedom to operate, right? If like building a company only to find out 3 years later that somebody had already closed out that space is not viable. And I think on the flip side, as somebody who's been on the academic side and done trials and so on, my internal calculus is before I submit a paper to a journal, I ask myself, is there anything here that's commercializable? Should I have that conversation with the IP attorneys? If I'm at an organization, or if I'm an independent researcher, then I call AJ or something like that. And I think I think for the entrepreneur in the audience, you have to define yourself what your competitive edge is going to be. In our case, it's technology. And for somebody else, it might be IP. And in that case, the investment early on is very much justified.
And AJ, I guess it would be interesting to learn from your perspective as a corporate advisor focused on the IP. How do you see yourself really assisting these companies in navigating strategically?
I think the way Ajay put it is exactly right. Every company is different. What's their strategy? What's their value proposition to their stakeholders? Some of them, it's get in early with IP, make sure we have those competitive barriers up, and can tell the idea to investors, acquirers, other stakeholders down the line as we've solidified the value proposition here. In other cases, it's looking for where can we put IP in place, maybe to say the company is being run well for a situation where the investors aren't going to necessarily do a deep dive on the IP, or so that we can show that even though there might be some related prior work here from others, that we do have some competitive barriers, maybe for high value features, things that are driving sales, and things that might drive eventual acquisition interest. Bottom line, we're looking for how do we tell a story about the company using the IP, or make sure that the two halves of that conversation relate to one another.
If that's very helpful, and maybe we can transition from corporate strategy to some of the more hot button issues that we see right now in AI and in healthcare applications, which is transparency. In the tech space, it seems to be okay at times to kind of black box an algorithm, but of course in healthcare settings, we need to understand how things work to anticipate what the outcomes could possibly be and sort of understand that process. On top of this, of course, are all sorts of socioeconomic issues that we want to be sensitive and mindful to, and our stakeholders want to understand really what they're being engaged with and by. So with Jay, maybe the question goes to you. Do you perceive a tension between being transparent in your algorithms and your AI and needing to also maintain a level of privacy to sort of protect your code?
Oh, wow. I mean, so this is an onion. It's got so many layers to it. I think in the context of healthcare, and I'm going to differentiate healthcare from financial services because, the interests in finance and healthcare are both the same. You want equitable outcomes to people with the potential. In healthcare, where it differs from finance, like lending, is that in lending, you can treat people, you have to treat people the same. Whereas in healthcare, you de facto have to treat people differently because there's so much interpersonal variance in how people respond to treatment, in order to generate that equitable outcome. So you touched on kind of the equitability piece, and then the fact that treatments have to be personalized, and they can't be one size fits all and generalizable. Like generalizable algorithms are much easier to patent, and there's good ROI on that, right? But when something becomes so contextual, that it works on only a few people, it's very hard to decide what to do with that IP.
Part and the crux of the matter
Right.
is,
Yeah.
on one, algorithms are
Yeah.
different than AI, and sometimes those two
Right.
can be conflated. And what I'm hearing is strict algorithms can yield non-personalized results, which are
Right.
suboptimal in healthcare applications.
Right. Um,
And
but
AI seems to provide that more personalized benefit, but is there a transparency issue that you
so yeah,
perceive at all?
sorry.
And yeah,
Yeah, so you were anchoring on transparency, and let me come back to that. Now, um, transparency, when you're dealing with a treatment, which is either as a decision support that's informing a decision maker or a decisioning tool. You need a basis to recommend to treat somebody differently than another person. And this kind of goes back to the generalization problem, right? Generalized things are easier to do. We work with the problem in the space of medication dosing. When a pharma takes a drug to market, they have to generalize their dosing guidance. But yeah, it doesn't mostly work on everyone. It works on maybe 40, 50% of the people as defined. So we are solving for the personalization and the de-averaging of what has been generalized. And that's kind of what we do. Now, in order to say that, hey, you need to treat this person differently, you need a very good basis to do that, even if you're informing a decision maker like a clinician or a pharmacist in our case. Because if you don't give a reason based on the concepts of knowledge they're familiar with, there's not going to be enough trust in what you're suggesting. That the fact that it's evidence-based, the fact that it might be driven by population data that is relevant to the practitioner, and I think that's where the constraint is. So, in a nutshell, for healthcare, especially when determining treatments rather than broad population scoring type of models, you need transparency in order to even operate. We are in that space, but I can imagine, if there's a broad model for risk scoring people that you're doing intake in a hospital, that could be a little bit different in terms of explainability because the impact is not on the patient, but on operations.
that's helpful, Jay. And AJ, curious if in your work with your clients as well, if the issue of transparency comes up at all as well. And I guess transparency too, when they engage with new clients and partners, being able to showcase, really what's under the hood, so to speak.
Yeah. So all the time, it's a constant discussion, even outside of AI, outside of healthcare. One thing that I always counsel people when they're having early stage conversations about is even if you can get an NDA signed, all an NDA is a ticket to sue someone, right? No one's looking for an opportunity to sue someone for a breach of an NDA. And the best way to avoid that situation is just be sort of a little bit phased on how you release information to your new partners. Don't give people the special sauce until you know you're going to be working together. So don't go into that first meeting and reveal everything. And when we're talking about AI, one of the things, and it's generally true across other types of software, what always comes up in AI is there are parts of it that are difficult to discern from the outside how exactly it's working, right? A lot of work goes into building a particular architecture. A lot of work goes into training it in a particular way. And sometimes that's just hidden in the back end. Might be hidden on the server, might be hidden inside the user device, but not something that's easily perceptible from the outside, how your technology operates. And people might not be able to figure that out without you. And so being deliberate about how you share that information can be helpful. And then that, comes back to an IP strategy conversation. When you're in that situation, if no one can tell whether you are using a particular technology or how your particular technology works, can you tell whether someone else is using it? And if you cannot, that might not be something that's good for patenting. Detectability is a question that often comes up for software and for what types of software, what types of innovations to patent. And similar one, just while we're on that that topic is just how longitudinal the idea might be, or how long lasting it is. Because, if we have a particular architecture that's fascinating and nobody can really tell what it is from the outside, might consider patenting it if it's super valuable, but the architecture details might only last 6 months or a year, right? And then you're on to a new architecture, you found something better. And so we want to wrap that into IP strategy. And so these are areas where, when you file a patent application that publishes, the details go out there, and we want to balance between what we're patenting and where we might get the value of patenting versus maybe what we want to keep as trade secret and keep it a little bit confidential for those things that you really wouldn't be able to tell if anybody else was using it anyway.
AJ, I have to say, I think that that's fantastic guidance for not only first-time entrepreneurs, but all, senior management executives to consider, which is you can do a phased approach to kind of sharing your IP estate. It's not a sort of one-time, here's everything. It wasn't too long, I remember representing a client, and we were talking with a strategic buyer, and he said, we have the NDA, but instead of just sharing all of our IP, let me just talk through a few things and explain a little bit, and we'll see where it lands. And the counterparty ended up being satisfied with that for a long time until formal diligence started. And actually, I think that the ability to explain the IP strategy in both layperson's terms and technical terms was helpful to everyone. And that's actually, maybe if we could shift the conversation there, I hear more and more about explainability as it pertains to AI and algorithms and patents. And at Jay, I see you smiling, so I'm gonna kind of stop here. What does explainability mean to you, and how do you utilize that in your conversations with counterparties?
Yeah, and so explainability is a term. I think interpretability is another term that's come up pretty more so recently. I think explainability, really the way I see it is, if a model is generating a score or suggesting a decision, that there needs to be kind of a human readable version of why, right? Good example, and it's a regulatory example. If you're deciding to not give somebody a credit card, you have to give them 3 reasons why, right? And it goes and it has to be reported to the bureaus and so on. And taking a complex ML model to generate those 3 human readable decisions is hard. And so you almost have to build a second layer of modeling in order to explain how the original model is operating. And that's what's happening there. The way, the distinction I make between that and interpretability is really, do we understand the inner beast in the machine, the Deus ex machina there well enough to say we understand the model? And really, the focus recently has shifted more towards interpretability, because there's a massive swath of deep learning based techniques that are really hard to intuitively understand. And the focus on interpretability is to convert that black box and more into a gray box. And I think, can we explain the decision or the recommendation in easy to understand terms? I think there's new methods that allow people to do that. Do we really understanding what's happening in the black box? Yeah, I don't think we're there yet. There's no human interpretable meaning, I find, in 1 out of 3 billion tokens in a large language model, for example. Yeah.
And AJ,
sorry, just to complete that, where this matters in my business or counterparty relationships is whether there's value exchange around. If you're making a credit decision model, 100%, you need to have explainability. If you're telling somebody how to treat a patient, 100%. Operational financial optimization, maybe.
That's help. And AJ, curious how this has been showing itself in your line of work as well. Explainability, transparency, where and where that kind of, how you would advise clients on how to approach those topics as well.
Yeah, the areas that I see this most is in innovations driving explainability or driving interpretability. As Ajay mentioned, there are tools that people are introducing to try to make this a little bit easier for companies to make their models interpretable or present the information different user interfaces. Excuse me. Fighting a cold. I'm in the tail end of it. And so we're talking with people about trying to protect their innovations around explainability and interpretability, which can be interesting because often that's the perceptible side of things, right? You can see what the output is. You can see what the feature was that was driving the particular decision, or how the model operated on the inputs to drive toward the outputs. And those techniques might be more eligible for patenting just because they're one, aligned with exactly where the value is, because customers are looking for explainability or interpretability, and so they align with the value proposition for the company. Good areas to build a IP estate around, and also perceptible, and so have a little bit more value as an asset.
This has been really helpful. We have time for one last question here and one last topic that we wanted to touch on, and this is something we hear quite often, and it brings us full circle to IP algorithms, AI, and corporate strategy. One of the things that we hear about is you either should or should not monetize your IP. That should be the focus of a startup. And we have seen rather rigorous beliefs on both sides. It would be interesting for the two of you, yes, no, or AJ as an attorney, you can say it depends. But should a startup
Lots of words that boil down to choose your own adventure, right?
So, yeah. In the time that we have left, what are your thoughts for an entrepreneur, and if they're saying, I want to monetize my IP? Ajay, maybe you can start first.
Yeah, ask yourself what that IP is first, right? In the field of AI and healthcare, if you're dealing with a lot of patient data, and what you're building a model, and the model you built is basically a machine representation of the patterns in that data, and you're trying to commercialize that. The data is going to change. The populations walking in the door of the hospitals is going to change, and you can ask, is this IP something worth keeping or not? Right? And really that, so my personal thoughts on this are the model object itself. It doesn't have enough ROI in protecting. If you have captive data, great. If you can convert that model into a configurational advantage, put a few models together in a configuration that really works well for certain use cases, I think that should be protected and guarded. So the things you do to transform the data, like feature engineering, in order to get a good model, and the things you do after you have a good model to actually make this work in a human context or care context, is where I focus. Happy to defer to other definitions here.
That three-phase workflow is exactly what I use with each of my clients, and I say the same thing. There's limited value in patenting the model itself because it's short-lived, it's not detectable. There's a saying, the model is not your product, and I tend to say the model is not your invention. And so when we're thinking about monetizing IP, sort of in my mind, the sort of vocabulary I use, we already have IP and we're trying to figure out what do we do with it. There are lots of different ways to monetize it. One is licensing it to somebody else. That's a great thing that startups should be thinking about doing. Can build it into their revenue modeling, can build it into their partnership agreements, making sure that when they come to a large company, when they're the small company, that they're on an even keel because they're presenting the IP. All of that is a great way to monetize. Sometimes people think about monetizing in terms of enforcing their IP through litigation. And I would say if you're a young company, you should not be thinking about litigation. You don't have the time, you don't have the resources, or you don't have the resources in time and in money to litigate. It's a real distraction from the mission of the company. Sometimes it happens, never say never. But I would say for a young company to be thinking about IP, what you're really doing is building value for the company. You're building assets for the company, aligning your barriers to entry and your market strategy with the value of your products, the value of your features, what you're telling stakeholders, what you're telling investors and acquirers. is the value of the company, and making sure that you have IP that aligns with that. And then you're selling them the option to go out and litigate if they want to. Again, it might come up that there's a young company that has to sue one of their competitors. Might come up if you want to send a nasty letter. But first and foremost, we should be thinking of these just as assets that we're compiling to list on the term sheet and maximize the value for whatever your exit is.
Fantastic. Well said on the exit being the last word of this entire session in the fireside, AJ. That was good to bring it full circle. AJ, can't thank the two of you enough for your time this afternoon. This has been very helpful, and I know that our community is really going to appreciate the dialogue. On behalf of Health Tech Build and all of our sponsors, thank you once again for joining us, and wishing everyone a great afternoon. Take care and be well. Bye.
Thank you both. Enjoy the conversation. Thank you. Cheers.